What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in this video I'm going to be going through some of the biggest winners and losers from a fantasy football perspective from round one of the NFL draft. Fantasy-wise, I think this was a super interesting round one. You had a ton of offensive players come off the board, a bunch of quarterbacks, a bunch of wide receivers, a tight end thrown in there. So I think there are a lot of interesting guys to talk about here as either winners or losers. And let's just dive right into it. So we're going to start off with the winners, and I feel like we have to start off with Caleb Williams. Now, everyone knew he was going to be going at the 101, and I think, everyone pretty much accepted that this was a pretty solid landing spot for a rookie quarterback. You start off with the fact that the Bears weren't actually the worst team in the NFL. They had that pick from the Panthers. He was going to be stepping into a group of weapons with DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Cole Kmet, DeAndre Swift. So a pretty solid landing spot for a number one pick. Caleb Williams, no surprise, ends up going to the Bears. But then you find out that at the 109, the Bears went out and they got Rome Odunze. So now you look at Caleb Williams' group of weapons, and it is absolutely stacked. You have potentially the best wide receiver trio in the NFL. I think, they give the Houston Texans a run for their money. Very solid tight end, a solid receiving running back. This is really just the dream situation for a, pick number one quarterback. So Caleb Williams, definitely a huge winner here. He is my clear rookie 101 in our rookie drafts. And then my clear rookie 102 at this point, I feel like we got to talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. And we assumed that he would have a top landing spot, whether it was with the Cardinals or the Chargers, but it's good to see that that top landing spot actually came through. If you're a wide receiver getting picked within the first 5 selections, you're typically not getting paired with a Kyler Murray level quarterback. I'm a big fan of Kyler. I think him and Marvin Harrison Jr. are going to be great together. So I like Marvin Harrison here as my rookie 102. And now shifting over to 2 winners that were not actually in this draft class, it's going to be Drake London and Kyle Pitts. And we got to talk about this Michael Penix pick. I mean, it seems like to pretty much everyone out there, this pick seems crazy. I feel like I still need more time to process it because it just, seems so strange for the Falcons to make that decision. And it's just also wild because if you told me that Michael Penix got top 10 draft capital, like I would say, wow, that's awesome for him fantasy-wise. But the fact that he went at pick 8 and it's disappointing, like the fact that he's potentially sitting behind Kirk Cousins, we're going to get into that a little bit later, but I want to talk about it from Drake London and Kyle Pitts' perspective, because I feel like they're probably like the only 2 guys that are actually winning from this draft pick. Not only did the Falcons pass up on a potential weapon like Rome Odunze with the 108, they actually went out and pretty much drafted like Kirk Cousins' successor. So in the short term, there's less competition. Drake London and Kyle Pitts are going to be able to play with Kirk Cousins, but now you actually have a guy in the building who will likely be the one who takes over for Kirk Cousins. So you have some more long-term security. Kirk Cousins, more of a veteran quarterback option. So I think this was a huge win, honestly, for both Drake London and Kyle Pitts. And even though we're starting off with the winners here, I do just want to talk about Michael Penix. I feel like he has to be considered a loser here with this pick, which is kind of crazy, like I mentioned, given the draft capital. The Falcons just went out in free agency, paid Kirk Cousins a ton of money, and I just think there were other landing spots out there who probably would have taken a swing on Penix, where he could have stepped in and been the day one starter, or at least have competed to have been the day one starter. This is a dude who played 6 college seasons, so I don't think he's in a position where he should be like sitting around as like a project quarterback, right? Like if this was JJ McCarthy, I would get it a little bit more just because he played 2 college seasons. He's still very young. But this is a dude who was in college for 6 years. He's almost 24 years old. And now you have Michael Penix potentially sitting like 3 to 4 years. It's just not a great situation for him here. Now, maybe it pans out. Kirk Cousins somehow gets hurt. Penix steps into a decent situation, but there are just a lot of things that need to happen for this to kind of swing in his favor. So I think he has to be considered a loser here. A couple quarterbacks back to back here who I think are winners. We're going to start off with JJ McCarthy. And pretty much of like the realistic landing spots for quarterbacks, I think JJ McCarthy, with the Vikings had to be pretty close to the top option. You could probably argue the Bears just based on the weapons, but McCarthy wasn't going 101. So outside of that, for the QB needy teams, I do think the Vikings was the best spot. You have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson as weapons, Kevin O'Connell as the head coach, a very strong offensive mind. With the Vikings landing spot, I do think he's a very strong mid-round 1 rookie pick, and also kind of important that the Vikings didn't have to give up a ton to trade up, right? There was talk about them moving up to the 4th pick, the 5th pick. They did move up one spot, but they weren't giving up a huge haul. And so that's draft capital they're going to have in the future to, continue to build around J.J. McCarthy. He may sit the first year, but not super concerned about it. They definitely drafted him to be the quarterback of the future. And then the other quarterback who I think has to be considered a winner is Bo Nix. Earlier in the week, the betting odds of him going in round one, he was pretty much like a 2-to-1 dog, like over plus 200 to go in round one. So it was not super likely. It seemed like he was going to fall to day two. He ends up getting picked at pick 12. And has a clear runway to be the Broncos quarterback one. Sean Payton just seems to absolutely love him. He was raving about him on the Pat McAfee draft broadcast. And so I just think he's going to get a real shot here to be the franchise quarterback. The draft capital backs it up. The limited competition also backs that up. And so I think he's definitely, kind of secured himself as a round one rookie pick. And then we've got a few more winners here. We got to talk about some wide receivers. Starting off here with Brian Thomas Jr. I just really like the landing spot here to the Jaguars. He just has a pretty wide open lane to become the wide receiver one for Trevor Lawrence. So I like this spot for Brian Thomas Jr. He was my wide receiver 4 heading into the draft. I think it's going to be close between him and the next winner, which is Xavier Worthy here. Obviously, you have to love the landing spot here for Worthy. Not only did he go to the Kansas City Chiefs, which them and the Bills seem to be the clear, top landing spots for wide receivers, but the Chiefs actually went up and traded up to get him, so they clearly wanted to bring Xavier Worthy on board. And I was pretty high on him heading into the draft, and it's good to see that, the draft capital kind of backed that up. Now, going to the Chiefs definitely doesn't guarantee that he's going to be a success for fantasy. Just look back a couple years to the Sky Moore pick, and I actually really liked Sky Moore as a prospect even before he went to the Chiefs, but it's definitely not a lock that you're going to become super fantasy relevant. But if Xavier Worthy does end up becoming a good player, his ceiling is just going to be so much higher playing with Patrick Mahomes. We know the Chiefs love their speed. If they're going to be able to scheme things up for him, I think this is a great situation and landing spot here for Xavier Worthy. Pretty much best case scenario, honestly, for him from this draft. And then the final winner, also at the wide receiver position, it's going to be Ricky Pearsall. Goes pick 31 to the 49ers. And full transparency, I'm not super high on him as a prospect. It's really tough to get on board with guys who don't dominate until their 5th year in college, because then you're kind of beating up on younger guys. There's some red flags on why you weren't able to put up big seasons before that, and he definitely falls into that category. But I mean, he's definitely a winner here. He's getting the first round draft capital to also a pretty interesting landing spot here with the 49ers, another team that's really able to set up their weapons for success. And then also this pick could be hinting that, the 49ers may actually be trading away Brandon Ayuk. There's been a lot of smoke there. Maybe something actually comes of that, soon, or potentially Deebo Samuel. But them going round one wide receiver, it may mean that they're moving on from one of their top guys right now. So I think he's definitely a winner here. And now pivoting over to the losers from this draft, I think there were, way more winners, way more solid landing spots. But already talked about Penix, a couple more guys here who I just think didn't get the best landing spots. I feel like we have to start off here with Malik Nabers. We're super high on him, still super high on him as a player. But man, the Chargers landing spot just would have been so perfect. He was there for pick 5. They opted to go tackle, which I know some people were criticizing the pick. I think, you go Nabers, you go Alt. They're both very strong prospects. But fantasy-wise, obviously I would have loved to see Malik Nabers paired with Justin Herbert. And it's also tough because you go from potentially being Justin Herbert's wide receiver 1 to now you're going to the Giants where you're Daniel Jones, wide receiver 1, not a ton of quarterback clarity there. And now him going to the Giants definitely isn't a death sentence. If I was super high on him before that, I'm not just going to tank him down my rookie rankings. I'm still a believer in Daboll, even if the quarterback situation isn't solved. And, the quarterback situation can turn around very quickly. Heading into next year, it could be a totally different outlook for this offense, but there's no, denying that this is not an ideal landing spot here for Malik Nabers. He was so close to getting paired with one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and now he's getting thrown into a not so great offensive situation. And then the final player I wanted to talk about here was Brock Bowers. And just going to the Raiders, it's not a great landing spot. Same thing with the Giants. There's no guarantee this is a bad situation long term. But just in the short term here for 2024, you actually have a roster with pretty solid weapons. Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, now Brock Bowers. maybe Michael Mayer if he turns it around, but them going out and drafting another wide receiver isn't exactly a great sign. But you have a quarterback room with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. And, all the top quarterbacks, at least the guys who had a shot to go in round one, those guys are all off the board. It sounded like the Raiders were in on Penix, but with him going, pick 8, obviously that was not in the cards. And you also had an interesting landing spot with the Jets, out there. It could have potentially happened. The Jets went in a different direction. So I do think, this isn't a great landing spot. I'd say he's a loser, in terms of the result of this draft, but still a great prospect, still someone I'll be very interested in rookie drafts. And just like Malik Nabers, it's not going to tank him in my rankings just because this isn't a super ideal spot. I'm sure he'll still find a way to have success, but just in the short term, especially 2024, not looking super great. So that's going to wrap it up for the top winners and losers. Really just a ton of players to talk about here. There were some guys that, kind of just intermediate landing spots that we didn't mention here, but I'm going to keep putting out content about the draft, and then once the draft is wrapped up, I'll be updating all my rookie rankings, so stay tuned for all of those. Thank you all for stopping by. How'd you feel about round one? Let me know down below, but thank you again, and I will see you in the next one.